All right, welcome back. We are COMP1115, that's Game Programming 1 in the fall 2025 semester at Georgian, and it is week 12, part 2 of our broadcast and recording. In the last part, what we did was we made a couple of things. We talked about structs. We said that structs are containers that hold our custom data types. We did that. And we also talked about binary writer and binary reader. We created um, two new functions. One of them was for writing, which is this one, and one of them was for reading, which was a lot bigger one. And the only reason why it's bigger is because it has a bunch of try-catch, catch stuff. It uses exception handling and all that stuff to make sure that there's not a problem. Otherwise, whenever you read something, it could crash your code. We don't want that, so we want to handle that kind of stuff from happening. Now I want to move into something new. So we've been talking about data persistence. Again, data persistence, that topic is big, right? Again, we're just kind of beginning with it this semester. There's different ways of using data and saving data. We can save it locally, or we can save it online, for example, in a database. We can save data in many ways, right? So, and in Unity, you save data in a specific way. I'm going to talk about that very briefly today, just as an aside. And I know that my friend Wallace is going to be talking about that with you next semester when he talks OOP and a little bit of Unity in the second half. Okay, so that's what's happening with him. So let's talk about JSON data and what that is. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And we're not learning JavaScript here in this course, right? This is not a web course. XML, which was basically another data format. I'm just going to go to XML for a second. And if I just type in XML, you can see what it looks like. It looks like HTML, right? XML kind of looks like this, right? With tags, Again, I'm just randomly picking something online to show you what it looks like. And each tag represents like properties, as an example, like for example, the date or the hour or whatever. This was the de facto standard for saving data in a more structured way. Because when I save data like, how we did before, if I look at my files that I have, let's go back to my files right now in my saves file. And if I look at this guy, Brackus the Bad, as an example, you can see that, it's very unstructured. It's just text. It doesn't tell you anything about this data. It doesn't tell you the type. It doesn't tell you like anything at all, right? Not even the names or whatever. And it doesn't give us a lot of data to reconstruct, right? One thing that this does is it's not really transformable or something that I can transfer from one system to the other. Yes, it's text. We can probably figure it out, as an example. But I want some type of data so that I can transmit it, to all kinds of places. And one of the way that we can use one data exchange format that we can use is XML, so extensible markup. That's what that is, right? Or we can use JSON. Now, people call this different things. People call it JSON because it's like object notation, or other things. I call it JSON. Okay, so JSON script because that's what it is. And JSON objects, what they are is, again, JavaScript object notation, which looks like this, right? That's what the example of what it looks like. And it stores data in key value pairs, right? So it has like, name is the key and value is whatever we have. So there's two parts and separated by a colon. So this part would be the name of the variable. The colon is basically saying, okay, after the colon comes the data that's stored in that variable. So why do we want to do this? Well, what it does for us is it creates a structure for us that we can reconstruct data based on this stuff. We have the names of the data, and if I want to read this, I can look at the data that I'm getting and reconstruct the struct like in another system. So I can consume this data in different ways, right? Whereas if I just see like numbers and letters, I don't know what those things are called, and my system might be different than your system. Here, I'm forcing you to use these names, right? I don't know what those other ones are. Like if I looked at my the data that I had before, this one, let's go back to that for a second. This, you don't know what these are. You don't know what 30, what is 30 assigned to? You have no idea when you read that. You don't know what 35 is assigned to, or what this is. It's probably his name, and this is probably his species, and this is probably his class or career in our case. But you don't really know what this is. Here, we're telling you what this is, and this structured way of saving data in the structured way is better. Here's something else to note. It's all text. It's all string, right? String data. So here's a beautiful thing that you can do with JSON data, because it's a string in many ways when you read it in, right? Then what we can do is we can save it as a string. Okay, I want you to take that in for a second. That means I can have a large amount of data saved as a string, right? And then I can parse that string and pull it back out into a much more complex data structure, right? So it's better in many ways than raw text. We can use StreamWriter and StreamReader to save this data format if we really want to, but there's a better way. And I want to show you that right now, right? So, again, it supports things like objects, arrays, strings, numbers, booleans. It supports rstruct. It'll support anything you want. It's a very flexible format in terms of reading and writing. It is clear text, right? It is clear text, so it's not a problem when it comes to this. But here's the beautiful thing again. If I was going to tell you this for a second, you can combine these saving methods. You can combine them, right? So that way you can save it as JSON data, convert it to a string, right? So first convert it to JSON data or data, then convert that to a string, then convert that to a binary. And so you can do a lot of really cool things with this, where you can actually now construct your class or struct by using JSON. But one thing at a time. Let's talk about how this would be used. So this is the data that I want. Then what I want to do is I want to store my struct, using JSON in C#. How do I do that? So I want to use something called the JSON serializer object, and it's part of the system.text.json namespace. That's where it's from, okay? And the JSON serializer, what it does is it converts between JSON, between JSON and C#, so we know what this thing. JSON files, again, are human readable, so they're not like binary files. We could make them so that we could encrypt them if we really want to, but they start off as the way it does. And order does not matter like it does in binary. And order does not matter like it does in StreamReader and StreamWriter. StreamReader and StreamWriter, the way you save everything is the way you have to load things back. Here, you don't. And the reason for this is because it loads everything back by property name. So when I read things in, I read things back into the property. It doesn't matter the order that I write it, which is also an advantage for us, which means I can update one field, right? Resave the whole thing, and when I load it back in, it doesn't matter if it's at the end or the top. As long as I have the same data, I'm good. JSON has a structure, okay? And that's one thing I didn't cover in this PowerPoint, because you don't need to know this structure necessarily. It is something that you can modify manually yourself, but the structure goes like this. There's a curly brace at the beginning of the data that's being saved. So when we actually save JSON data, we're going to do this today. The curly brace denotes this is the start of the data that we're saving, okay? The curly brace at the bottom is the end of file, if you will. So this is a document. I want you to think about this whole thing as a document that I'm saving, okay? And then we have key value pairs. The key, in this case, is the name of the variable, followed by a colon, followed by the data, followed by a comma. And each of the commas separate each property in value all the way to the bottom. All right, now these are single values, right? And if I was to save an array, it would look different than this. I can use square brackets and so on. And I can show you this later on. It won't be today, but as we move forward, JSON data as a delivery vehicle for the way we save things and so on, we'll be using it more often. So let's see how it works. Let's talk about a little bit about some words I said, because we want to be able to serialize and deserialize. Let's talk about those two words, serialize and deserialize. And there's something that I talk about the entire time when we work with data. And when we work together again, like for example in Unity or an Unreal Engine in the future, we're going to serialize and deserialize data there as well. But let's talk about serialization, that funny word and what that means, right? So it's really converting an object or struct or even any variable at all into a format that can be stored and transmitted. In other words, encoding. I encode my data into a specific format. Okay, that's serialization. And when I decode it, I deserialize it. Those are the words we use when it comes to when we program, serialize and deserialize, right? So we also talk sometimes about a serial device, right? A device like a hard drive, or a mouse, or something else. We are passing data, from, or we're kind of communicating with the device by serializing and deserializing data all the time. Okay, even a mouse, when you move it around, sends signals to your computer's hardware, and those signals are serialized, right? Because they're compressed. They're signals that come from the mouse and they mean on off, right? And then what we do is the program deserializes those signals, decodes them, and puts them back into a format that, the program understands what you want to do. It's an event that occurs when you move your mouse around, right? So serializing and deserializing. It's very, very interesting. Um, so again, what we want to do is we want to store data and we want to load data later on. We want to convert data into something that is encoded in a certain structure and then decode it later on, encoding and decoding. So I want to use, start talking about when we serialize something with the JSON serializer, we have a certain amount of options we want to turn on because we want to tell the serializer, JSON, how to perform, right? So there's a special structure called the JSON serializer options structure. That's what it is, okay? And this structure allows us to turn on and off certain switches, if you will, options, right? So one of them is include fields. So include fields, if I use that serialization option, I'm going to show you what this looks like in a second, so bear with me. I instruct the serializer, my encoder, to include public fields of the struct. That's what it does, okay? And it's required because our character data struct does not use properties, okay? So we're not there yet. So, and why I'm saying this is because in the future, when we do this again, we're going to use our serializer, deserializer. Next week, when we talk about classes, classes do include properties, and properties are different than fields, which we'll talk about next week. You'll understand what I mean. It's more names, more words, more structures, right? Right indented, so formats the JSON structure with indentation. We want that. Property names case insensitive. We don't care how the properties are named right now. We can turn that on and off. For now, I'm going to make it so that character name and character name will both work. Later on, we will not use this because we care about how things are written. We want to make things case sensitive, and so on. But in terms of saving and writing data, a lot of times it doesn't matter because you only have the name of the field is the same. There's only one name that matches that field. You don't want to ever name things like character name and use that both in the same class. Doesn't make any sense. Or struct. It's going to be either one or the other. So this is okay normally, right? Allow trailing commas. Well, what this means is I said that there's commas here, but what about at the bottom? What if I add a comma here? Well, normally that would be an error, right? Because JSON doesn't want you to do it this way. It wants you to end with no comma at the end. But we can add in an option so that allow trailing commas is okay. If I add a trailing comma by accident or something, I'm going to be okay. It's not going to be so bad. And the other one is read comment handling. So what if I want to add comments to a JSON file? Like I want to manually create my data first, and then you're going to read it in. I'm going to show you this idea. So here is another piece of data that I want to show you, and it's going to be something that we're going to be working on next week. So here's some data. I've saved the careers for Army, Scion, Rogue, and Telepath here as JSON data. I want to show you what this looks like. So I'm going to pull up Army first, right? And I want to look and see what this looks like. So here is a piece of JSON data, right? And now we have a different structure. Okay, I want to talk about this. So the curly brace opens the JSON data. The curly brace closes the JSON data. The name is Army. That's the name of the skill block, or sorry, the career. So the name of the career is up the top here. That's the name of the career. Then you have skill blocks, right? Skill blocks are, blocks of 4 skills that we're going to talk about next week, right? And there are 2 of them. So notice it's an array. The square brackets denote an array right here. Here's an array. Here, this one and this one. It's an array of skills, so array of two skill blocks. So there's a skill block here, and there's a skill block here. These are 2 skill blocks right here. Skill block, right? So an array of skill blocks. Well, a skill block also has a name. It also has attributes, right? And it also has an array of skills. So notice an array, what it looks like. Here's an array, and this is array. Skills is not just a single thing. Skills are actually another type of struct as well. So you can see that it's an array of objects, curly braces, right? So this is something that we'll be reading from next week when we create our next form, right? I'm showing it to you because this is something that we can do. Well, we can write this manually here because it's just clear text. I can create these things on my own, right, as an example, and then I can read them in, right, from using our code, right? So that's something that we can do. And we can also add comments. So, one thing that we can do with JSON is if I add a comment, as an example, I can do something like this. But notice how JSON doesn't like comments. See how it's like, it says like, we don't like, if I hover over, it says comments are not permitted, right, in JSON typically. But what if I want to add them in, because I want to comment up my code and stuff like that? I could do so if I wanted to. I could totally do so. And what I'm doing here is basically saying, comment handling is okay. So don't worry about it. Ignore them is what we're going to do. We're going to ignore comments, okay? So just in case you wanted to annotate your data, we could do that as well. So I'm including them this week. Next week, we may change some of these things. But I'm showing you that there's a JSON serializer option that we can use. And because we're going to use the same options for both the writing and the reading of data, right? We're going to use the same options. Then we want to make a little method. And this little method, get JSON options, is something that I'm going to be using in my program. Okay, now I don't have to do this. I could have just included these options every single time I did my loading and saving, but it makes sense for me to do it like this because it saves us a little bit of space when it comes to this stuff. So I've just broken it out a little bit. So I want you to take this right here. Here it is. And let's put that into our code for the next part. So again, going back into our program, again, I'm in program.cs. I'm going to go back to the bottom. I've just put that stuff inside of your chat. And here, I'm putting it in here. Okay, JSON serializer options. Notice that the using statement on top automatically includes system.text.json. As soon as I start typing, it includes the stuff that I need. If it didn't do it for you, you need to include system.text.json at the top, a using statement. And what this does is it enables that functionality because JSON isn't out of the box included in C#. You have to turn it on, okay? Which is what I've done. So here's an example of what we've done, right? We've kind of made this new JSON serializer options object called options. And then the options, we're going to configure all of them. We're going to say that we're going to turn certain options on, and then we're going to return those options back out as, as an example, as something that we're going to use. Notice that the return type of this function is also JSON serializer options. That's the type that we're returning. JSON serializer options is a type, right? Not just, it's a big type. It's not like an int or a float. It's a class type, right? A custom type. So here we're going to do the same thing. We're going to use a summary that's going to say this method returns the JSON serializer options object with predefined settings. And again, you can see that kind of the same thing that it has there. Okay. Actually, I just take this one because I like this one more. I don't like what Visual Studio just gave me. There we go. All right, so let's put this up on GitHub. So you and I have the same stuff. So again, I'm going to go to developer, PowerShell, git add dot, git commit -m. Again, make sure you save your file when you do this. Sometimes it'll say like nothing to commit. Well, that's because you haven't saved your file. And here I'm going to say something like, added, get JSON options method to program.cs. That's what I'm doing here, and get pushed. Wonderful. So that's what this is. By the way, if you notice that it says here that if I hover over, it says use object initializer. And sometimes you'll get these little pop-ups in Visual Studio where it's basically get this little thing here that says, hey, why don't you try this out? And it does something completely different like this. Please, guys, don't do this. This is a shorthand for some stuff that it does. And I don't want you to do it like this right now. Okay, this is something that you may do next semester when Wallace comes over, but please don't accept these little things. I want you to go with the basic things in your code that looks like this for now. Okay, this also tells us, hey, it expects you to put var in there because what var does is it kind of figures out what the type is. This is okay. If you're going to use var, var basically means whatever you're assigning to a variable, that's its type, right? So you can do it this way if you want to. I'm going to make it explicit. This is long form, and this way you know what the type is. So this is the first part. So we've added in JSON serializer options. We're going to use this in a second. Next, I want to start thinking about saving a struct with JSON. So how do I do this? How do I save now with JSON, right? Well, here is a couple things to note about this, right? So first thing is we need to declare character data again, right? I'm using the null coalescing operator here to get the data from settings. Now this is important because I don't know if settings has anything in there or not. For example, the name. Name is not required, but I want to make sure that name is not null or I'm going to assign nothing to it, right? And it's important that we get data in here like this because for a couple reasons when we're saving, it's important because remember, it's going to spit out a format that we're going to use, right? JSON is going to kind of create a structure for us. And the first thing we do is we're going to make a string. Notice that it's a string. And we're going to use the JSON serializer, and we're going to use the serialize method. That's what this does. So this is encoding our data. We're going to give it the character data struct. So that's going to be the structure, how things are put together. All right. And then we're going to use our get JSON options that we're going to send to this serializer to let it know how it's going to encode our data. So a little bit more complex than we've seen before. Not much, but this line basically says, let's create a string. This makes a string. Okay, so this string is right here. Now, I'm using write all text. You can do this. Or you can use a string stream again, which is basically a stream writer, just like we did before, to write the path just as we did before, right? Exactly the same thing, except instead of instead of doing it this way, you know, kind of like we're just writing one big string out as an example, you can take this string and convert it and use binary writer, right? Because again, I'm just saving a string. It doesn't know how much of what that's, you know, how big that string is. It could be a small string, like, you know, 1 character. It can be 1,000 characters. It doesn't know, right? So when we read and write, we can use either, you know, like when we read and write a string, we can use stream writer if we really want to. We can also write it to binary, like we just said. Here, I'm just using a low-level file write. So I'm saying, hey, file, I want to write all text. That's something that we talked about early, very briefly last week. We talked about this. I'm using the path of the file. So I don't have to use a file stream in this case, just the path that we get from the method. And then we're going to take that JSON data, which is just a string, and it's going to spit it out inside the file. It's a beautiful thing, my friends. Believe me, once you have this as a string, you can store this as a settings too, right? Because it's just a string. Let me explain. Go back to this. You know you have your settings file, right? Here's your settings file. Well, these are all strings. It doesn't allow me to put in my own custom data type in here. It won't allow me to. It has other things in here. It has long, short, you know, a string, a short, as byte long, float, double, decimal, all these things that it has in here. That's what it has, right? But it doesn't have character data. It won't allow me to do that. But if I encode it as a string, if I take my character data, convert it to a string, which is just JSON, store it here as a string, and then read it back in, and then decode it again, I'm good. And I only need one field here in my settings as opposed to 6 fields or 8 fields or whatever it's going to be, right? Make sense? So this is a beautiful thing. It allows us to have different options. Again, I know that you guys can't see the possibilities yet, some of you, but it's only because you don't understand, when it comes to, like all the things that you can do with this format. I'm giving you this format so you understand that there's another way of encoding things other than just clear text or binary, okay? All right, so now that we have this, we can make this happen. I'm going to take this whole file here, right, which is our save character JSON file, and put this in there as well. So save character JSON allows us to save the character as JSON, right? That's what it is. Copy this and put it inside of your chat here so you have that too. There it is. And again, it serializes to JSON and writes to a file. That's what this does. So I'm going to kind of just make a comment here, right, that this method loads character data. It doesn't load, it saves character data. Saves the character data as JSON to a specified file path. That's good enough. That's fine. That's save character JSON. Okay, so there's one thing to note is it uses the get JSON options method right here. It uses this method in here because we need to pass it in here, right? So serialize is one option. Notice that serialize, I just want to kind of go in here again. If I go JSON serializer, right, dot serialize, notice there's a lot of options too, not just one thing, right? Serialize to document, which is a JSON document, serialize to node. Again, we're scratching the surface with what we're doing, but it has many overloads, right? A lot of different options here. And again, if you want to see all of them, just double click on that and press F12, and it should give you everything, all the different loads here like that. That's basically what it gives you. So it gives you the stream, the object, and the JSON type info. That's what that is. That's an option. You can also get the object, the type, and then JSON serializer options, which is what we were doing here. So there's notice the stream. And there's many other ways to do that. Serialize based on a value, right? That's also something that you can do. The stream and the type value and serializer options, like lots of ways of writing the same thing. Okay, just letting you know. So this is all the different things that we can do here. Okay. So really cool, kind of way of doing things when we look at that kind of thing altogether, right? So I can also look at the definitions, right, for this. I can kind of open this up and you can see what this would look like. So here is what serialize is. You can see that it says converts the provided value into a type value to serialize, right, and so on. And you can see that there's many different ways of doing the same serialization. That's what it's doing, okay? So I'm not going to show you, that's the underlying system to show you how this works. So system.serialize is what that does. So it basically serializes the data, and I'm passing in the data to serialize, and that's because I'm passing in, notice it says passing in character data value, right? I could have also done this. So character data. Could have done this as well, right? Which basically say serialize this stuff as type character data, but notice it says, if I hover over, it says remove redundant type arguments because it also knows what this is. You don't need to explicitly do this, all right? So that's why you don't need to do that. So I'm going to remove that, and that's what it comes down to, okay? And that's writes our stuff to JSON. Okay, what about reading? Well, reading is kind of the same thing. It's longer, but I want to talk about the same kinds of things. We could use a null coalescing operator again if we really want to here. But in this case, what we're doing is we're reading each individual object, as an example, back into character data, and there isn't a way of stopping it from giving us null. All right, that's one thing to note about JSON. It kind of scoops everything in from the file, and if the file is badly formed, the only thing that we can do is we can check afterwards. And so we can't use our null coalescing operator here because we're just reading it directly into character data. So here's something that we do. One is we read it in the first part as a string. Okay, the string, we read everything back in as a string, the entire thing. It's one big string, okay? And then once we have the string, because that's what we do when we do read all text. Again, these two low-level operations, write all text, read all text. We're reading and writing string data. That's what we're doing, okay? When we read all text in, then what we're doing here is we're saving it as a string. Once we have it as a string, we can pass this back into the data to deserialize it, convert it back from a string into character data. And that what it does now is it uses the structure of the character data to bring it back in. Again, it doesn't matter. As long as you have all the properties there, it will understand. It doesn't have to be in the right order. As long as the properties are there and it fills in the character data, then it's good. We still use JSON options here because what we want to do is we want to, read it in the same format that it was written out. Okay, but for the most part, it kind of aligns everything that we've done so far. One thing that's new is the new exception, because you could have a JSON exception. Somehow, if that JSON data is malformed or someone went in there and manhandled it by themselves, as an example, that would be something that can cause an issue. And this is where we would want to have some kind of exception handling, so that way the program won't crash if we have malformed data that we're trying to read in. Okay, so that is happening there. So let me put this again, character load JSON, into our program.cs file. So again, I'm going to do that back at the bottom here. There's our program.cs file, and I'm going to put the last part in because it's going to complain if I don't do it. So it's not completely formatted. There we go. At the bottom of here, I'm going to put this. There we go. And now I have our new load character JSON. So now we have three different ways of reading and writing. I can write just plain text, nothing, no structure at all, with stream writer. I can read it back in with stream reader. I can write it out with binary writer. I can read it back in with binary reader. I can write it out with my serialization, and I'm just basically writing it as a string, but I'm serializing first and then writing it out, and I can serialize it when it comes back in. But again, there's one more step that we can take here, which is if I want to write it out as binary, it won't matter. It won't care. And so let me explain what I mean by that just really quickly. Again, one more time. Remember that this reads in a string because that's the way we saved it. But we don't have to save it as a string. We can save it as binary if we want, because when we're saving it right here in the save character JSON, we could, instead of doing this step here, we could just use binary writer and write everything just like we've done up here. If I go to binary writer, where's my save character binary? What am I doing? I'm saying use the file stream, right? And then I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do writer.write. And what am I writing? I'm writing string. I'm writing a string. So I could just write a string. Like the binary writer doesn't care what you write. You write a string, right? When we read it in, we'll read it in back as a string, right? Which is, if I really want to, I can read it back in as a string here, right? So here I'm reading all text as a string, but I can use a binary reader, right? So again, if you look at the binary reader information, if I was going to read it back as binary, I would read it back in as binary, right? There's my binary reader, but I'm reading it in as a string, so that it says, okay, well, this is a big string of data. Once I've read it back into a string, then it's a string. It's not JSON yet. I can decode it by using the deserializer, just like we've done before. Here's my deserializer, and I can tell it that this string isn't just a regular string. It's a string of JSON data, and it'll read it back in, and this way we can overcome the limitation of just writing out known or built-in types. I can write out and all that stuff to binary custom types like my struct or a class, which is awesome. All right, now again, you guys don't understand yet. You will as you come forward, because you will have to save your character data in Unity. Saving and loading a whole level, you can do that, right? With binary. That's what you want to do. You want to write out the whole level. that snapshot of everything you want to keep track of. And you can keep track of a lot of stuff that you want to save in the level. For example, if I want to save things like the position of my character, or if I want to save things like, the position of my enemies, health, all kinds of stuff that is part of your character's data. You can save all that out. And that's what happens when we play video games. When we get to a checkpoint and we say it's automatically saved, what was it doing? It's taking your data and pushing it out, as an example, to to your it's pushing it out to a file, but it's taking all the data that's in there for your character and for the world, and saving what it needs to save. So when you come back to that level, you can load in at the exact same state that you left. Okay, that's what we're doing here. Saving and loading is really, really important. Okay, so that is our JSON character, load character JSON, and we're going to put that up on GitHub as well. So again, going back to here, I'm going to say git add dot, make sure we save. Sorry, git add dot, git commit -n, we'll say added load character JSON method to program.cs. Again, we're doing your in-class exercise as we go. That's what we're doing. Okay. Questions around this concept of JSON data and why is it so important? So now that I've read and written different things out, I want to be able to save our data, as an example, in order for us to test all this stuff out. So there is a new thing for you to do. And what I want you to do, I'm going to talk about it first, and then I'm going to give you some time. We're sitting at around 10 o'clock, kind of like recording time. What I want you guys to do is in class, that means now that we're together, I want you to do this part, this section. Okay, there's not a lot of slides here to follow, but I want to go over this part here. It's important that you do this, guys, because on the test, I may give you something like a control that I want you to implement with some instructions, and I need you to follow those instructions and actually do those things during the test, right? So here is a practice for us, as an example, and I want to start with what is a menu strip. I want to talk about it first, and then you're going to do it, okay? I'm not going to actually do the work. You're going to do the work. So first of all, what is it? Okay. So a menu strip is a Windows Forms control. That's what it is. You've seen menu strips before. We see them everywhere. We even see them here in my PowerPoint. Here's File, Home, Insert. That's a menu strip right here, right? And the menu strip has a bunch of menu items, right? That's what they are. And it improves the user experience by making your program easier to navigate and by placing important actions in a familiar location, usually at the top of the file, or sometimes it's at the bottom or somewhere else. You can put menu strips, you can anchor menu strips and stuff like that at different places, to make them familiar. A lot of times we put them at the top, okay? Each menu item, right, can open a drop-down list. So that's one thing to note, that menu items can be single, where you can click on them and they do something right away. So example would be help right here in our menu. It gives me other options here in PowerPoint, right? But in Visual Studio, here's Visual Studio. Notice that there's a menu strip here. If I click on help on Visual Studio, and notice Visual Studio, all the menu items are in full caps, right? And then the sub items are in, kind of title case. That's what they are here. Title case here. So these are menu items. You also have an about box that comes up. There's about Visual Studio. It talks about the version and all that stuff, the build that I'm looking at here, license information, and a bunch of other stuff. That's our about box that I talked about last time, right? So it contains a lot of things like this, and you can make your own custom about box like this, the way you like. So that's what menus do. Okay, and we have other examples of menus in different programs. I'm just going to show you Visual Studio Code here. So here's Visual Studio Code. This is what we looked at. Now you can see there's a file, edit, selection, view. There's a go menu, and there's a bunch of other stuff here you can see, right? Like for example, more menus like help, and you can see here help, about, there you go. There's your help box, your about box. It basically tells you the load of my Visual Studio Code, another editor that I use, as an example. And it talks about when it was last updated and a bunch of other stuff. But these menus here, these menus is what you're going to make yourself. So that's what the menu strip is. It's just a little menu that you're going to implement in your code. Okay. Menu strip also supports keyboard shortcuts. Sometimes we call these accelerators. And the reason why they're called accelerators is because a power user of your application, might want to use shortcut keys as opposed to going to the menu all the time. Okay. One thing we haven't covered, which we may next week, is a context menu. When you right-click on a form, you want a context menu to come up to do certain things. We can also cover those things as well. The beautiful thing about what you're creating, guys, in the second half of this semester is a tool, like I talked about before, where you can use this in conjunction with your Unity or whatever engine that you're using to create structures like this, like character data, that you want to read into Unity afterwards. All right, let's continue with this example. So it automatically adjusts to the form size, so it kind of snaps to the size of the entire form. That's what it does, and we want to see this kind of stuff. So what it does is do this. Now, what I want you guys to do is this. I want you to follow the instructions here. I'm going to give you some time to do this now. It's 10 o'clock. I want you to remove the save and the about buttons. Okay, that's what I want you to do. I want you to move the stuff that's inside of the final form down a little bit to give space for your, for your menu strip. Then I want you to drag and drop the menu strip on top of that. So please follow this structure that I want you to do as best as you can. Okay, and I'll go over and check it with you after. Once you've done that, what you can do is you can, if you go to there's a little arrow at the top, of the menu strip that you add in. Instead of you adding in menu items manually, you could insert standard items. And inserting standard items will allow you to do this. Now, there's too much here. We're not going to edit things or, our tools and stuff like that. You could include editing, right? Like our form right now, our final form is read only. That's how we've made it, right? So you can't actually type anything in here, right? But you could, if you click on edit, maybe you could change all these objects to, they're editable now. You can go in there and edit your final form and change stuff, right? It's totally up to you if you wanted this. Tools, there could be another tools menu. We have a tools menu, for example, inside of our Visual Studio. You can see that they're in the same format. Look, file, edit, view, all that stuff, those three things here, tools, help, they're kind of in the same structure. Microsoft does this with Windows, and we're making Windows forms. And the reason why we're doing this, file, view, help, you can see that this is the exact same way. It's a very standard structure in everything that we do. So again, if I looked at Visual Studio Code, file, edit, view, right, help, exact same structure. So it can do that for us too. Instead of us creating that structure, it's a common structure, so we can insert standard items. Then what we can do is we can modify them. We don't need edit and tools, and you can just delete them by pressing the delete key, right? Once you do that, you can open up the file menu item. You can notice that there are a number of items we don't care about. We don't care about the new open, save, print, or print preview. And we can get rid of those. The only ones we need is the save as and the exit. We need those two from the file menu. And then in the help, you also have contents, index, search. You have all these things. Contents would be really great if you wanted to document your your application, and you wanted to give all kinds of information about how to use your application, a bunch of other forms about how to do that. We don't have that. Index, you can look stuff up or whatever. Search, if you wanted to search for something in your app or whatever, you can do that. But the only thing we care about is the about form that you're going to use here. All right, so we just need that. And so again, what you could have done is just use the basic thing when you kind of added in your form and type them in here. That's also a possibility, but I've made it so that you know that insert standard items is a thing, and that's why I put it there. Notice also the dock. You can dock it to top. There's different places to dock it, and also the grip style. If you want your little menu strip to be draggable and droppable, you can do that as well. You can program all that stuff as we do in Windows Forms. Okay, so that's what we want you to do. once you're done, the save as function is going to have, or save as menu item is going to have submenu items. Take a look at that binary file, JSON file, or text file. So you're going to be able to save different file types, right, at the end of your final form. Instead of pressing that save button, which only saves one way, you're going to be able to save in different ways. Okay, that's what the idea is here. And I've given you some stuff. Once you create your menu strip, then what you want to do is rename some stuff and also remove some of the separators, because also what happens is when you make a menu, I'm just going to go up here, you can see that there are separators here. See that little line here? That's a separator. And what you can do here is you can remove the separators as well if they're, because it doesn't make any sense to have all those separators everywhere. So you can remove separators, or you can even add a separator if you want to as well. Okay, so all these things are possible by using the menu system. So I want you to rename them. You can do that in two ways. You can use the properties menu, properties tab here to do that. And the other way to do that is to go into the menu collection and do it that way. First, try the properties tab just by going and clicking on each of the menu items that you made, and then you can rename them because there's a name property in the properties tab where you can rename things like this, okay? And remove anything that you don't need. Notice I've taken away text tool strip menu item, there's a tool strip separator 1. That doesn't have to be there. I've taken away some of these separators because I don't need them, okay, as an example. Okay, so that is what I want you to do. Then, creating events for all the menu items is as simple as any other button. Double click on any of the menu items, and it'll create the click event for you, right? And notice that there's an about, an exit, a text tool strip, JSON tool strip, and binary tool strip menu item click. These are all the different ones. You can lay them out because the about tool strip menu item, you're going to move the data from the about box. Take a look at that already. So remember, you already have in your final form, here's your final form, you have this, save and about, right? That means there's data in these places in the click events here. So if I go to F7, you can see that in F7, there is a about click. Well, you're going to move this part to the new menu item about. And so you don't need this click event anymore. Now be careful. The first thing you want to do is remove the event from the button. Then you can move the code, this part, and then you can delete this. That's the order that you want to do it in. I'll say that one more time. When you're deleting an event, the way to do this is, you can also do this through the form designer, but it's trickier. If you can break your code like we've seen before, right? So you're going to go to final form. Let's say I want to get rid of the click event for my about button. Well, remember, I can go here first on the properties, and in when I have my about button selected, I can go to the little lightning bolt, the events button, and now I can wipe this out. When I wipe it out, that means I remove it from the designer, it goes away, and then if I move it over or delete it or whatever, your program won't care. It's not going to break your form, okay? But if you just delete this button, bad things happen, my friends. Don't just delete the button. First, delete the event, then delete the button, then go back in and do those things. And so when you delete the button, right, the button goes away, but the event is still registered. Be careful, all right? Well, it could be still registered. Shouldn't, but because it's part of the designer, it'll go away too. But it might be, because depending on how we've done their form. That's why I'm telling you that's something to do in this order, right? It's a safe way of doing it. No, delete the event first. That's the order. Delete the event first, right? Then delete the button, then delete the code. Okay, that's in the order that you want to do. So I'll write this down. So delete events, and using events button in properties tab, then delete button in the form, and then move the code if you want to from the event to the new one, right? Then delete the old event. It's kind of in that order. That's what I would say. And this way, if you did it that way, you're going to be pretty safe. It's not going to mess you up. Okay. So that's the way I recommend you do it. about doing that for both the about and save. So let's go back to this. So now once you've done this, you have these new events, and I've given you the code for this. Now let's take a look at the code here for the button save click event. So this is the exact same thing. We're just moving the code from the button save click event into the text tool strip menu click event, right? So we're moving it right here. Take a look at that. That's what's happening. And this is just the old code, right? That's the old code that we had in final form, which is here. So I'm just going to go into that code here. This is the click event. This whole code here, the stuff that's inside the click event, is moving to the new one that you're going to create from the menu, because you're going to have a text. You're going to save as text that that we talked about earlier. You're going to have this option here, text file, right? That code for the text file is just coming from the existing save button. You already have that code. But I've also provided you code samples for the other ones. So there's that one, but here's what the one that would look like for the JSON tool strip menu item. Notice the only difference is we're just using the only thing we're changing, well, they're changing a couple things. One, the filter is changed. So the filter is changed, so it saves it as a JSON extension. So .json, that's what it's going to save it as, right? And it's going to use the way we're doing it, the save file dialog. It's going to use program, the program class, and we made this save character JSON method just now. We just made it before we came to this part, and it's going to save this using the file name from the dialog. So that's what this does. So those are the changes for the JSON tool strip menu item. And then similarly, I don't know why this is so small, but for the binary, let's do that again. For the binary, and it's also Cascadian mono. What the hell? What was I thinking? For the binary one, let's make it a little bigger. You can see it, so you can see it better. You can see that the binary tool strip menu item is the exact same. It just saves it as a .dat file. So the filter changes to the .dat filter. I've just chosen that. Some people might have chosen .bin for binary. I don't like the .bin. Sometimes it associates with something else. .dat is pretty, it's R kind of format, and that's the extension that we're going to use. And notice that it says the new extension is the .dat extension. And then what we're going to be doing is, once we have that, it's going to save character binary. It's going to use the save character binary method for that from the program, okay? So that is your first udo part that you want to do, which is basically you add the menu strip, you align it, and I'm going to give you time. I'm going to stop recording now and come back and check it out later. The other one that I want you to do for this in-class exercise, the last part of this is this, which is I want you to update our start form. So now that we've saved everything as different formats, we want to be able to load everything in as different formats. And so now what I'm doing is I'm changing the button load click event last so that you can load up different kinds of files. Okay, so what that means is if I go back to my start form, notice has these new load and exit. I'm not going to put a little menu strip here for that. I could, but I like the buttons in this case.
I'm not quite sure how to help you with that.
Right. And then what I want to do is this button load click is very, very small, because the button load click event right now only loads my character, for my load character, only text files, right? Well, I wanted to detect the type of file it needs to load based on the extension that you select, which means it's going to give you a filter. What do you want to load? Do you want to load a text character file, a binary character file, a JSON character file? They're going to all have different extensions. Then we're going to use a switch case, which is kind of like an if-else. If the extension is a .chr, then we know that we're going to load the file with our load character, our default text loader, right? Is the file a .dat? Well, if that's true, let's load it binary. If the file is a .json, we're going to load JSON. And when we do those kind of things, it'll activate those methods, and you'll be good to go. I've changed a couple things here, because what I'm also doing is the loaded variable is basically true false if I've loaded something or not. If loaded is true, then character loaded is true. that's in the program. And if that's true, then I'm going to go to the selection form, okay? So this is something that I've rearranged for you guys, and I've put this in as another thing that you need to do on your own. This is one big file. It's here in your PowerPoint, and that's it. So your in-class exercise 11 is exactly what we've gone through. We've done this part, we've done this part, we've done this part, we've done this part. You know, we've done all these parts up until now until you get to this part. This is for you to do, right? And so I'm going to stop recording now, and I'm going to work with the people here in class to make sure that they know what to do, right? But this is your to do for in-class exercise 11. That's all there is. I want you guys to make sure you can save and load, because next week we're going to build on this with classes. So I'm going to stop now. No more recordings for today. And then I'm going to go back with our fine folks, and then we'll go over how to do this. It's really just following the instructions. And next week I'll give you the solution file. All right, guys? Questions before we move on for the day? I'm going to, please don't leave. Try and do this with me again, because I want you guys to have some help. Just in case you run into some issues, I want to be there to help you. Okay? All right, I'll stop recording now. And then for the people who are watching this video, good luck. Oh, one thing I didn't cover in these two videos, which I must say before we go for the day, I have to mention this just to be kind of transparent. If you didn't finish in-class exercise 10, what do you do? As an example, because you need to finish it before you get to in-class exercise 11. Well, yes and no, because in-class exercise 11, I mean, really could have started with in-class exercise 9 because we added, or parts of in-class exercise 10, because I went through building in-class exercise 10 with you. I don't have an in-class exercise 11 started. I don't have that. You have to build up, from in-class exercise 10, and there's a reason for this. Even if you didn't finish in-class exercise 10, guys, I need you to follow those videos and get it done, because it's so critical for the test. Okay, I can't just give you a starter. I've got to get you to do the work, right? So whether you get marks for it or not, it doesn't matter at this point. It matters that you actually do the in-class exercise 10, you finish it off somehow, and then go into in-class exercise 11. So there's no starter for in-class exercise 11 for this one. Okay, there's just too much that you'd miss if you just copy pasted and went on from there. Okay, so please make sure you get that done. I know it's extra work for those people who haven't finished in-class exercise 10, but you need to do it. Okay. Questions around this before we go? Marking is also something I got to be very transparent about. I'm behind. A lot of this prep takes time, so please bear with me. If I need something from you, if I need a video from you, if I need something like your GitHub repository, let's suppose it expired or something, I will send you a note. Do not worry. I will make sure that everyone gets marks, even part marks for stuff that they've done. I try and be as fair as possible with the stuff you've submitted. If you don't submit anything, I can't mark it. Okay, so please make sure you submit. It's always important that you submit something, even if it's incomplete. I'd rather have something that's incomplete to give you part marks than 0. Okay, so that's important. So please make sure you do that. Otherwise, that's it for me today. I'm going to stop recording, and I'll see you guys online next week, because it's an online week. Next week is remote, so I'm going to see you guys online next week. All right? Thanks so much, guys.